The kitchen knives hurled themselves from the magnetic strip, embedding in the opposite wall with sickening thuds as Michael ducked behind the counter. Gravity twisted sideways, pulling chairs and plates toward what used to be the ceiling. And through the chaos, he glimpsed something small and orange, moving against the impossible physics. His reflection in the microwave door showed a different man entirely, one with dead eyes and stitched scars across his face. While the real Michael pressed himself lower as more cutlery whistled overhead. The delivery box sat unopened on the warped floor, Amazon's logo now pulsing with an otherworldly glow as the cardboard began to split along seams that hadn't existed moments before. Michael's medical training told him this defied every natural law, but his mounting desperation overrode logic. His daughter Evelyn needed that experimental treatment, and the insurance company's denial letter still burned in his memory when he'd clicked "buy now" on what he thought was surgical equipment from an overseas supplier. A child's giggle echoed from inside the box as something clawed its way through the corrupted cardboard, tiny fingers with chipped nail polish emerging first. The kitchen had become a whirlwind of floating debris and twisted reality. But Michael could only stare as a plastic head pushed through. Red hair wild with static, blue eyes that tracked his movement with predatory intelligence. The doll's mouth stretched into a grin that revealed too many teeth, each one sharp and yellowed with age. "Hi, I'm Chucky," the thing said in a voice like broken glass, though its lips never moved. "Wanna play?" Michael scrambled backward as the doll fully emerged, standing barely 3 feet tall, but radiating malevolence that made his surgical hands shake uncontrollably. The gravity had stabilized enough for him to stand, but every reflective surface in the kitchen now showed the same scarred stranger, and the walls had begun weeping a substance too dark to be blood. The doll's plastic head rotated 90 degrees with an audible click. "You ordered something to save little Evelyn, didn't you, Doctor?" Michael's breath caught. He'd never mentioned his daughter's name in the order, had only listed his own address, desperate for any medical equipment that might help where conventional medicine had failed. Evelyn's rare genetic condition had exhausted his savings and driven him to search increasingly obscure medical suppliers, clicking through page after page of overseas vendors until he'd found what looked like a legitimate surgical device. "How do you?" "I know lots of things." Chucky's eyes never blinked as he took a step forward, his small shoes squeaking against the linoleum. "I know you've been lying to your daughter about how sick she really is. I know you sold your wedding ring last month. I know you've been stealing supplies from the hospital." The accusations hit like physical blows because they were true. Michael had bent every ethical rule, compromised his medical license, all for a daughter who might not live to see her 8th birthday. The doll somehow knew his desperate secrets, the corruption he'd embraced in service of love. "What do you want?" Michael whispered. Chucky's grin widened impossibly. "To play house? You be the daddy, I'll be the son, and Evelyn?" The doll paused, head tilting with mechanical precision. "Well, she can be whatever's left when we're done." The kitchen lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness broken only by the doll's eyes, which now glowed with orange fire. Michael heard his own footsteps echoing from somewhere above, impossible in a single-story house, and realized something else was moving through his home. When the lights returned, Chucky stood directly in front of him, close enough that Michael could smell something like old plastic and copper pennies. The doll's overalls were stained with fresh blood, though whose remained unclear. "The game's already started," Chucky whispered, and Michael heard his daughter screaming from her bedroom upstairs in a house that had no second floor. Michael ran toward the sound, his medical bag clutched against his chest like a shield. The hallway stretched longer than it should, doors appearing where none had existed, each one marked with a child's crude drawing of a family being torn apart. The screaming grew louder, more desperate, but also strangely distorted, as if coming from underwater or through layers of time. He burst through Evelyn's door to find her bed empty, covers thrown back as if she'd been dragged away. But the window showed not his familiar backyard, but an endless void dotted with floating furniture and distant screams. In the glass, his reflection finally showed his true face again, streaked with tears and terror. Daddy. Michael spun to find Evelyn standing in the corner, but wrong. Her skin had the waxy sheen of plastic, her movements too stiff, eyes too bright. When she smiled, he saw the same sharp teeth that had filled Chucky's mouth. "We're playing house now," she said in that broken glass voice. "Forever and ever." Michael's hands fumbled for his medical bag, muscle memory overriding panic. Inside were the surgical tools he'd stolen, the equipment he'd bought with money he didn't have, all for a daughter who might already be lost. But as his fingers closed around a scalpel, he noticed something else. A lighter, the one he'd used to sterilize instruments during his residency. The plastic Evelyn took a step closer, arms outstretched for a hug that would mean his death. Behind her, the real Evelyn flickered like a television with poor reception, trapped somehow within or beneath her doppelganger's form. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Michael whispered, and flicked the lighter. The flame caught the plastic Evelyn's synthetic hair immediately, spreading across her false skin with unnatural speed. She shrieked, not with his daughter's voice, but with Chucky's, as the fire revealed the truth beneath. The doll's original form writhed within the burning disguise, orange hair crackling, overall straps melting into his plastic torso. "You can't burn what's already dead," Chucky howled, but Michael had spent years studying human anatomy, understanding how bodies could be broken and repaired. He'd learned that some infections required cutting away diseased tissue, no matter how much it hurt. The real Evelyn materialized as her false double burned, collapsing to the floor but breathing, alive, herself again. Michael scooped her up and ran for the window, knowing somehow that the void beyond offered their only escape from this house that had become a trap. They fell through darkness, punctuated by floating objects from their old life, and landed hard on grass that felt real beneath Michael's surgical scrubs. Above them, the house folded in on itself like origami in reverse, taking Chucky's screams with it into whatever dimension had birthed this nightmare. But as they walked away, Michael noticed Evelyn's shadow walking slightly out of step with her body. And when she smiled up at him, her teeth looked just a little too sharp in the morning light. The package delivery had been only the beginning. Something had used his desperation as an invitation, and while they'd escaped the immediate trap, the game was far from over. Michael's hands would shake for months afterward whenever he opened any package, and he never ordered anything online again. He paid cash for everything, met vendors in person, looked them in the eye before any transaction. Because he'd learned that sometimes the things we need most desperately are exactly what open the door for the things that want to destroy us. And late at night, when Evelyn laughed while playing with her toys, Michael couldn't quite shake the feeling that one of those laughs belonged to someone else entirely. 3 weeks later, Michael discovered the first body in the hospital morgue, a security guard named William, found with his throat opened by what appeared to be impossibly small hands. The wound patterns matched nothing in Michael's surgical experience, too precise for an animal, yet too savage for human tools. The coroner ruled it death by unknown causes, but Michael recognized the puncture marks from tiny fingernails. Evelyn's condition had mysteriously improved since their escape from the house, her blood work showing impossible recovery rates that baffled her entire medical team. Michael should have felt relief, but instead found himself checking her room every night, counting her stuffed animals, measuring their positions against mental photographs he'd memorized. The teddy bears never moved, but sometimes their button eyes seemed to track his movement across the darkened room. "Daddy, can we go to the toy store?" Evelyn asked over breakfast. Her appetite returned with startling vigor. She'd gained weight, color in her cheeks, blooming like artificial roses. But her requests had grown increasingly specific. She wanted dolls with red hair, action figures with overalls, anything small enough to hide in her backpack. Michael said no again, but noticed how her smile flickered when denied, just for a millisecond, revealing something calculating underneath. The expression belonged to a much older mind, wearing his daughter's face like an ill-fitting mask. The second body appeared in the hospital parking garage, a nurse named Patricia, discovered by the overnight cleaning crew with similar wounds. This time, security cameras caught movement. A small figure dragging something across the concrete, too dark to identify but moving with purpose that no child should possess. Michael volunteered to review the footage, studying the grainy images until his eyes burned. But the shape remained frustratingly unclear. That night, he installed motion sensors throughout their apartment, medical-grade equipment borrowed from the sleep study lab. The devices would detect any movement smaller than a house cat, triggering silent alerts to his pager. Michael told himself it was paranoia, that stress from Evelyn's illness had fractured his grip on reality, but the wounds on those bodies were real. At 3:17 a.m., every sensor triggered simultaneously. Michael rushed to Evelyn's room, finding her bed empty and the window open to a fire escape he'd never noticed before. The motion detectors showed a pattern of movement that traced impossible geometry. Footsteps on the ceiling, across walls, through spaces too narrow for human passage. Whatever moved through their home obeyed no physical laws. He found Evelyn in the basement laundry room, surrounded by every toy she'd ever owned arranged in a perfect circle. She sat cross-legged in the center, having a tea party with invisible guests, pouring imaginary liquid into tiny plastic cups while humming a tune that made Michael's teeth ache. "Join us, Daddy," she said without looking up. "My friends want to meet you properly." The toys began to move on their own. Stuffed animals crawling forward on polyester bellies, action figures marching in formation, board game pieces sliding across the concrete floor to form letters that spelled play with us in children's alphabet blocks. Michael counted at least 30 individual toys, all moving with coordinated intelligence. Evelyn, look at me. Michael kept his voice steady, drawing on years of delivering terminal diagnoses. Where did you get all these toys? She finally raised her head, and Michael saw that her eyes had changed color, still brown, but flecked with orange sparks that pulsed like dying embers. My friend gives them to me. He says every good girl deserves presents. A jack-in-the-box cranked itself open behind her, but instead of a clown, a miniature version of Chucky's head popped up, grinning with malicious joy. She's been such a good little helper, it said in that familiar broken glass voice, bringing me new friends to play with. William and Patricia were just the beginning. Michael understood with dawning horror that his daughter had become the doll's accomplice, that whatever infection had started in that impossible house had taken root in her recovering body. The medical miracle of her improvement wasn't divine intervention. It was supernatural corruption, trading her humanity for physical health. Evelyn, we need to leave, right now. Michael stepped toward the circle, but the toys moved to block his path. A teddy bear's button eyes began bleeding real tears, while a plastic soldier raised its rifle, somehow generating actual threat despite its size. But we just started playing, Evelyn protested, and her voice carried harmonics that belonged to something much older. My friend says we can't stop until everyone joins our game. The basement walls began sweating that same dark substance from the kitchen, forming words in languages Michael didn't recognize but somehow understood. Binding agreements written in fluids that had once been human. The jack-in-the-box cranked again, and this time Chucky's full head emerged, neck stretching impossibly as plastic lips moved with wet, organic sounds. The contract was quite specific, Chucky explained, head bobbing on its extended neck like a snake preparing to strike. One life for another. Evelyn gets to live and I get to play. Forever. Michael's medical bag sat by the laundry machines, forgotten in his rush to find his daughter. Inside was surgical instruments, but also something else. A small spray bottle of industrial disinfectant he'd borrowed from the hospital's sterilization unit. The kind that dissolved organic compounds at the molecular level. Evelyn, Michael said carefully, do you remember the story I used to tell you about the brave princess who saved her kingdom? His daughter's head tilted, confusion breaking through whatever influence controlled her. The one who used her brain instead of magic? That's right. Sometimes the best weapon isn't a sword. It's knowing your enemy's weakness. Michael lunged for his bag as the toys surged forward, tiny hands and claws reaching for his ankles. He sprayed the disinfectant in a wide arc, watching plastic faces melt and fabric bodies dissolve into chemical soup. Chucky's head recoiled, his extended neck snapping back like a rubber band. Clever doctor, but you can't sterilize what's already inside her. Michael saw the truth in his daughter's changed eyes. The infection wasn't just supernatural, but medical. A parasitic entity that had fused with her cellular structure during her recovery. Conventional treatment would kill the host along with the invader. But Michael had spent years developing experimental protocols for precisely this kind of impossible case. Evelyn, I need you to trust me. Michael pulled a syringe from his bag, filling it with a mixture of the disinfectant and something else. a compound he'd been developing for her original condition, designed to target invasive genetic material. This is going to hurt, but it will save you. The remaining toys converged on Michael, but Evelyn suddenly stood, brushing them aside with newfound strength. "I don't want to play anymore," she announced, her voice shifting between childish innocence and ancient malice. "I want my real daddy back." The internal struggle manifested physically. Evelyn's skin rippled as two consciousness fought for control, her features alternating between human warmth and plastic coldness. Michael seized the moment of distraction, injecting the compound directly into her carotid artery with the precision that had made him the youngest chief resident in his program's history. Chucky's scream shattered every piece of glass in the basement as the entity was chemically burned from Evelyn's system. The doll's head deflated like a punctured balloon, orange hair falling out in clumps, plastic features melting into an unrecognizable mass of synthetic waste. Evelyn collapsed, her skin returning to normal human tones, but her breathing remained steady and strong. The toys had become inert plastic again, scattered across the floor like evidence of an interrupted crime scene. Michael gathered his daughter in his arms, carrying her toward the stairs as the basement walls stopped bleeding and reality reasserted its familiar rules. But as they reached the upper floor, Michael caught a glimpse of movement in the hallway mirror. Not their reflection, but something else watching from within the glass. A child's laugh echoed from somewhere inside the walls, muffled but unmistakably present. And Michael realized that destroying Chucky's physical form had only sent the entity deeper into hiding. Evelyn's recovery would continue, her medical miracle unexplained by any conventional diagnosis. But Michael would never stop watching for signs of the infection's return. Every toy store they passed made his hands shake. Every delivery truck triggered memories of that first supernatural assault. And he found himself checking Evelyn's eyes multiple times each day for orange sparks that might signal the entity's return. They moved to a new city within the month, Michael transferring to a different hospital where no one knew about his desperate choices or mysterious recovery stories. He burned every toy Evelyn had ever owned, replacing them with books and art supplies, anything that couldn't harbor tiny malevolent spirits. But sometimes, when she drew pictures of the new life, Michael noticed extra figures in the backgrounds. Small shapes with wild hair and knowing grins that she claimed were imaginary friends. The battle was won, but the war continued in subtler forms, fought now in the spaces between normal life and supernatural threat. Michael had learned that love could drive good people to make terrible bargains, and that some prices demanded payment long after the initial transaction was complete. He'd saved his daughter's life, but at the cost of understanding that safety was always temporary, that evil could wear any face, even one belonging to something loved. The Amazon delivery trucks still came to their new address, but Michael refused every package, sending them back unopened regardless of sender or contents. Because he'd learned that sometimes the thing you need most desperately is exactly what the darkness uses to find its way inside.